Hi there. This week's reading focuses on the racial controversy that has surrounded South Carolina's history and the response that there is to rectifying it, specifically through a monument that was proposed, and how this solution could reinforce, not solve, the problems that have plagued this state. So, two South Carolina legislators, Greg Gregory and Darrell Jackson, called for a statue of Robert Smalls, who was a slave, a Union soldier, and eventual congressman, to be built on South Carolina State House grounds. There was also a counterproposal by Republican Representatives Bill Chumley and Mike Burns, who argued that black Confederate soldiers should be recognized too. So, Confederate monuments and flags in their existence have often sparked a debate that ends in violence. Some cities were able to remove them with little fuss, like Boston, but in Charlottesville, which is in Virginia, it sparked an alt-right protest of white nationalists, and there was a counter-protest too. And this all led to 34 people getting injured and one person dying. In response to this event, government officials began actively removing Confederate statues, which officials stated that it was important to remove them for public safety and racial healing. So with all this violence and the lack of visual remembrance, there has been a call for the memorialization of the Unchained in the public discourse. The 2016 opening of the National Museum of African American History and Culture was a step in this right direction, but it should not be the only step. So monuments and memorials have been a big part of how we preserve our history. In the U.S., there are currently 20 military parks, 18 battlefields, 14 historic sites, 14 national cemeteries, 11 national monuments, and 9 memorials that are dedicated to those who fought in these wars specifically: the French and Indian War, the American Revolution, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the American Civil War, the American Indian Wars, World War II, the Cold War, the Korean War, and finally the Vietnam War. And these do not account for the local and state structures that honor war heroes. So you can see, as a country, we very much have emphasized honoring people who have served in these wars through monuments and memorials. It's a big part of our history and how we preserve it. But the thing with these monuments is that they kind of change how we view war. The thing with war is that it's tied to pain. And with these monuments and statues, people can kind of seek to reframe the wars as more of a heroic and glorious thing, to ignore the pain and the negative aspects of these wars and how bad that could really get. And this can exemplify how the government holds power over our perception of things. I think that it is important that we should honor those who gave up their lives in these wars through these monuments and memorials, but it does take away from our attention of the more negative aspects of these wars. And even if it's not intentional, and I think this is also in line with how we think in a lot of situations, we always tend to focus on the good sometimes, so much that we ignore the bad side of it, specifically the negative consequences that come from it. So the thing with black Confederate soldiers is that it's a very interesting topic. It's important to recognize their existence, but it's riddled with uncertainty and controversy. Some reports indicate that black slaves contributed to the war through mining, construction, and farming, while some argue that some were soldiers in camps. This allows neo-Confederates to use their existence to frame the Civil War as more of a fight for the states' rights themselves, instead of slavery, which was the main problem. And so it's pretty much allows them to shift the narrative, which ignores the very core of the issue. But some people argue, though, that black people never fought at all in the Civil War. A professor at our school, Walter Edgar, maintains that there is no evidence of black soldiers fighting for the Confederacy in the state of South Carolina. It is also worth noting that black slaves were forbidden from owning or operating firearms until 1865 due to Confederate laws. There is also no record of black Confederate soldiers receiving compensation for their service. Blackface was also mentioned, and it explains pretty much that blackface not only hurt black people, but it justified the inhumanities committed, and it allowed white people to assert their perceived dominance over black people. And there was also white guilt, which was brought up in a way that this was described as the vacuum of moral authority that comes from simply knowing one's race is associated with racism. So with white guilt, it actually enables response to compensate for the atrocities committed, but at the same time it doesn't enable true discourse about race. So you can apply all these things to the monument itself. The monument is an attempt to compensate for the atrocities black people faced throughout the history of not only South Carolina, but the entire U.S., but it falls into the problem of not enabling true discourse about race. It is an attempt, but it falls short, and it feeds into some of the problems that were brought up. So it could be just a start, but there needs to be more after it, and just this one monument does not really solve anything, and that's kind of what this entire paper was trying to explain. So thank you for listening and have a good day.